The Valorian Empire had stood for 12,000 years, spanning 47 star systems and governing trillions of sentient beings. Their bureaucracy was legendary, their military unstoppable, and their economy, according to their own records, perfectly balanced. Then they hired humans. Kiana. Chen stepped off the transport shuttle onto Valor Prime with nothing but a worn briefcase and a coffee thermos that had seen better days. Behind her, Kendricks Morrison followed, tablet in hand, already scrolling through the preliminary financial documents the Valorians had sent. "This is going to be interesting," Kendricks muttered, his eyes narrowing at a particular line item. "They've listed Imperial Glory Maintenance as a legitimate expense category." Kiana smirked. "Wait until you see their depreciation schedules. I think they're still writing off warships from the third expansion." The Valorians hadn't wanted human accountants. That much was clear from the 7-foot-tall reception officer, who greeted them with barely concealed disdain. Supreme Auditor Vexler, a being whose scales shimmered with iridescent authority, regarded the two humans as one might regard insects that had wandered into a palace. "You come highly recommended," Vexler said, though his tone suggested he doubted the source. "The Galactic Commerce Guild claims your species has an unusual aptitude for financial optimization. We prefer to call it finding where the money actually is." Kiana replied cheerfully. The Valorians had hired humans for a simple reason. Their empire's revenue had been mysteriously declining for 3 centuries, and none of their own auditors could explain why. Every department reported efficiency. Every colony showed profit. Yet somehow, the Imperial Treasury continued to shrink. Kendricks and Kiana were given a small office in the bowels of the Imperial Archives, surrounded by data crystals containing financial records dating back millennia. Most species would have been overwhelmed. Most species would have started with recent files and worked backward. Humans, however, had invented forensic accounting. "Here," Kendricks said on their third day, highlighting a transaction from 900 years ago. "Department for 147 requisition funds for strategic resource allocation." "That's vague." Kiana noted. "It gets better. Department for 147 doesn't exist. Never has." Kiana leaned forward. "But the money went somewhere." "Exactly." What they discovered over the following weeks would have toppled lesser empires immediately. The Valorians, in their meticulous bureaucratic glory, had created a system so complex that it had become self-parasitic. Ghost departments siphoned funds. Shell colonies existed only on paper, yet received imperial subsidies. Tax collectors on distant worlds had been dead for centuries, but their collections continued to flow straight into accounts that fed back into other fabricated programs. The empire hadn't been robbed by external forces. It had been slowly devouring itself through its own administrative complexity, each layer of bureaucracy adding new inefficiencies that compounded over millennia. "This is beautiful," Kendricks whispered, staring at a flowchart that now covered 3 walls of their office. "It's like a Ponzi scheme designed by someone who forgot they were running a Ponzi scheme." Kiana was less poetic. "This is an empire-ending disaster. We need to tell Vexler." The Supreme Auditor's scales lost their luster as Kiana and Kendricks presented their findings. Around the conference table, senior Valorian officials sat in stunned silence as the two humans methodically dismantled 12,000 years of assumed fiscal stability. "Impossible," one official whispered. "Our systems have been refined over millennia. That's the problem," Kendricks replied, pulling up another chart. "You kept refining without ever cleaning house. Look, the Department of Agricultural Subsidies is paying farms on worlds that were strip-mined 800 years ago. The Military Pension Fund is supporting soldiers from wars that never happened. Your educational system is funding universities on colonies that were abandoned before any classes were held." "How much?" Vexler's voice was barely audible. Kiana met his eyes. "At current rates, with all the compounding inefficiencies and ghost programs, the Valorian Empire is functionally bankrupt. You have perhaps 5 years before systemic collapse." The room erupted. Officials shouted in 3 different languages. One threw a data pad. Another simply slumped in their chair, defeated. But Kiana wasn't finished, however, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We can fix it." The next 6 months were brutal. Kendricks and Kiana, given emergency powers by an increasingly desperate Imperial Council, began the largest financial audit in galactic history. They hired human accountants from Earth, Mars, Europa Station, anywhere they could find someone who understood the peculiar human talent for tracking money through impossibly complex systems. Ghost departments were dissolved, fake colonies purged from the records, redundant agencies merged or eliminated. Tax collectors were actually verified to exist before their collections were processed. The Valorians watched in horror and fascination as humans tore through their bureaucracy with the efficiency of a surgical strike. "How are your species so good at this?" Vexler asked one evening, finding Kiana still working in her office at 3 a.m. She looked up from a particularly egregious pension fraud case and smiled tiredly. "We had to be. Earth has 100 nation-states, each with their own tax codes, regulations, and loopholes. We've been gaming financial systems since we invented currency. The only difference is scale, but the dedication," Vexler pressed. "You work endlessly on our problems because it's a good problem," Kendricks said, entering with fresh coffee for Kiana. "Your empire created a puzzle so complex it became a trap. We love puzzles, and we really love finding money that people thought was lost when the audit was finally complete." The Valorian Empire's actual financial position was radically different from what anyone had believed. They weren't as wealthy as they'd thought, but they weren't bankrupt either. Freed from the weight of phantom expenses and ghost programs, their economy actually functioned. The humans had saved the Empire by nearly destroying its bureaucracy. As Kiana and Kendricks prepared to return to Earth, Vexler presented them with the Star of Valor, the Empire's highest civilian honor. "You have done what we could not," he said formally. "You saw through our complexity to the truth beneath." Kiana accepted the medal with a slight bow. "Just remember, hire your auditors before you need to be saved. It's cheaper that way." As their shuttle lifted from Valor Prime, Kendricks looked at his partner and grinned. "You know what the best part is?" "What?" "We're going to be very, very busy. Every empire in the galaxy is going to want their books checked now." Kiana laughed and raised her coffee thermos in a toast. "Humanity, fuck yeah. We audited an empire to death and brought it back to life. What's next?" The galaxy, it seemed, was full of financial mysteries waiting for human accountants to solve.